My son called me the night before his engagement dinner and asked me to do something I never expected. He said, "Dad, tomorrow night, don't come as yourself. Come as one of the waiters." At first, I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. He told me his fiancée, Vanessa, had some very strong opinions about people, especially people who worked service jobs. And before he married her, he wanted to see who she really was beneath all the charm. So the next evening, I put on a white serving uniform, grabbed a tray, and walked into the most expensive restaurant in the city. A restaurant I happened to own. The second I walked up to their table and served Vanessa her appetizer, she looked me up and down like I was invisible. Then, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, she said, "Can someone please teach this old waiter how to do his job properly?" The whole table went quiet, but I stayed in character. What Vanessa didn't know was that every single person working in that restaurant knew exactly who I was. And by the end of that dinner, everything changed. But honestly, the part that shocked me the most wasn't Vanessa's behavior. It was my son's reaction. That was the one thing I never saw coming. Welcome to Proven Right Stories. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, because on this channel, the people who get judged, ignored, and looked down on, they always get the final word. Now before we begin, get comfortable. Grab your coffee, maybe some popcorn too, because today's story, this one has a twist inside another twist. And trust me, by the time we reach the end, you're probably going to want to call somebody just to talk about what you heard. All right, let's get into it. My name is Richard Holt. I'm 58 years old. And before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand something most men in my position would never admit out loud. Money changes the way people see you. Not always in obvious ways, and not always in bad ways, but it changes things. It acts like a filter. When people know you have money, status, influence, they behave one way. And when they think you don't, they behave another. And the distance between those two versions of a person tells you almost everything you need to know about their character. I learned that lesson when I was 31 years old. That was the year I sold my first company for more money than I ever thought I'd see in my lifetime. And almost overnight, people around me started changing. Friends I'd known for years suddenly treated me differently. Conversations felt different. People who never returned my calls somehow always had time for lunch. And complete strangers? They started showing up with smiles that felt just a little too rehearsed. At first, I found it flattering. Then I found it disappointing. So for the next 27 years, I paid very close attention to that gap. The difference between how people treat you when they think you matter and how they treat you when they think you don't. Which is exactly how I ended up wearing a white serving uniform and carrying a tray through one of my own restaurants on a Thursday night in September. Now, let me tell you about my son, Daniel. Daniel is 31. He has his mother's eyes and my stubborn streak, which, depending on the day, is either a blessing or a complete disaster. He works for my company, but not because I handed him a cushy title or cleared a path for him. Actually, he insisted on the opposite. When he joined the company at 24, he started down in logistics alongside employees who had absolutely no idea he was my son. That was his choice, not mine. He told me he wanted to know what he was capable of without the whole name opening doors for him before he even knocked. And I respected that. Truthfully, I was proud of him. Probably more proud than I've ever actually said out loud. That's something fathers don't always get right. Daniel met Vanessa Crane at an industry conference in Chicago about 14 months before that dinner. She worked in marketing for a high-end real estate development firm. She was 28. Beautiful, polished, confident. The kind of person who walks into a room and instantly scans it, quietly deciding who matters and who doesn't. Daniel fell hard for her. I still remember the phone call after their third date. He sounded happier than I'd heard him in years. He said, "Dad, I think she's the one." And I told him I was happy for him. I told him I couldn't wait to meet her. But privately, I had another thought entirely. I'd like to see who she is when she doesn't realize she's being watched. The call came in on a Wednesday night, a little after 10. Now, Daniel almost never calls me that late unless something's wrong. So the second I saw his name on my phone, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I answered, and before I could even ask what was going on, he said, "Dad, I've been thinking about the engagement dinner." His voice sounded serious. Careful. He told me Vanessa's family was flying in from Connecticut, and he wanted everything to be perfect. Then he said, "But I need to ask you something first, and I need you to hear me out before you say no." That got my attention. I leaned back in my chair and told him to go ahead. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "I don't want you to come as my father." Another pause. "I want you to come as part of the catering staff." I honestly thought I misheard him. For a second, I just sat there in silence. And Daniel immediately said, "I know how that sounds." Then his tone changed. More serious. More personal. He said, "Dad, I've been noticing things about Vanessa. Little things. The way she talks to people when she thinks they don't matter. The way she can spend 20 minutes charming an executive, then barely acknowledge the assistant standing next to him. The way she smiles at people she sees as important and looks right through everyone else." I didn't interrupt him once. Then he got quiet for a moment and said something that stayed with me. "I love her. Or at least, I think I do. But before I ask this woman to spend her life with me, I need to know who she really is when she's not trying to impress anybody. I need to see it with my own eyes." Then he said, "And I need you to trust me when I say this isn't some game. This is me trying to make the right decision." I sat there for a long moment without saying anything. Because the truth is, I understood exactly what he meant. Finally, I asked him one question. "What restaurant?" And when he answered, "Meridian," I almost laughed. Meridian wasn't just another upscale restaurant in the city. It was the flagship property of Holt Hospitality Group, my company. I'd spent 15 years building that restaurant group from the ground up, and Meridian was the crown jewel. I opened it myself back in 2019. I knew the kitchen staff by name. I knew which bartender was saving for nursing school and which line cook had 3 kids at home. That place wasn't just business to me. It was personal. I told Daniel I'd handle the arrangements. Then, just before we hung up, he said, "One more thing, Dad. Don't tell anyone who you are, not even the staff. I'll handle the front of house. You just serve the appetizers." I shook my head and laughed quietly to myself. Then I said, "All right." And for the first time that night, his voice softened. "Thank you." After we hung up, I stayed in my study for a while, just sitting there in the silence, thinking about the kind of man my son had become. Because it takes a certain kind of character to ask your billionaire father to dress up as a waiter at his own engagement dinner. Not to humiliate anyone, not to play games, but because you genuinely want to make the right choice before marrying someone you love. And honestly, in that moment, I think I was prouder of Daniel than I had been in years. That I arrived at Meridian a little before 6 that evening. The dinner wasn't scheduled until 7, but I wanted time to settle in before the guests arrived. I met briefly with Marcus, the head of service. Marcus had been with me for 11 years. Loyal, calm under pressure, the kind of man every restaurant owner hopes to find once in a career. I'd already called him earlier that afternoon and explained the situation. To his credit, he didn't ask a single unnecessary question. No raised eyebrows. No awkward jokes. He simply nodded, handed me a white serving jacket and a notepad, and assigned me to the private dining room where Daniel had booked the engagement dinner. And I have to tell you, walking through a restaurant you own while dressed as a waiter is a very strange feeling. It's like stepping into an entirely different identity. I had spent years sitting in that dining room at the best table in the house, hosting investors, city officials, journalists, business partners. People used to recognize me the second I walked through the front doors. That night, nobody looked twice at me. I was just the older server carrying water glasses and checking table settings. And the difference in how the room felt was immediate. The maitre d' gave me a slightly longer glance than usual when I walked by. I assumed Marcus had warned him about something, but he never said a word. He just moved on. Like I belonged there. Like I had always belonged there. The Crane family arrived right at 7. Vanessa's parents had flown in from Hartford. Her mother, Carol, carried herself with that very specific kind of old New England elegance. Quiet, reserved, careful with every word. The kind of woman who notices everything but rarely reacts out loud. Her father, George, was the opposite. Warm, loud, friendly. The kind of man who grabs your hand with both of his when he shakes it and makes you feel like he's known you for years. And then Vanessa walked in with Daniel. I remember noticing that the entire room subtly shifted toward her the second she entered. She was wearing a deep green dress, her hair pinned up neatly, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing people are paying attention. Daniel had described her as beautiful and polished. He was right, but there was something else too. She seemed extremely aware of herself in every space she entered, almost like she was constantly measuring the room while the room measured her back. She took the center seat at the table naturally, effortlessly, not because anyone told her to, because she expected to be there. I stepped forward to pour water for the table. Still or sparkling? I asked politely. Vanessa didn't look at me. Not once. She simply gestured toward her glass with 2 fingers and said, "Still." Her eyes never left the conversation she was having with her mother. I poured the water quietly and stepped away. And that was our very first interaction. The dinner moved forward after that, like nothing had happened. At least on the surface. Daniel stayed composed, doing everything he could to keep the atmosphere warm. He introduced both families properly, making sure everyone was seated, included, and comfortable. His mother, Catherine, sat across from Vanessa's father. I had made a point not to tell Catherine anything beforehand, because I knew her well enough to know that if she even suspected what was going on, it would have been over in 5 minutes. So she sat there, unaware, but observant, as always. And from my position near the service station, I watched everything. Vanessa was engaging, but only selectively. She laughed at George Crane's stories like she genuinely enjoyed them. She asked Catherine thoughtful questions about travel, about places she had been, about experiences she had collected over the years. And when she spoke to Daniel, there was a softness there, a practiced kind of affection, the kind that knows it's being seen, the kind that understands its audience. She would lightly touch Daniel's arm when she laughed, just enough to signal closeness, just enough for everyone else at the table to notice. And then I brought out the appetizers. Lobster bisque, 6 carefully plated servings. I moved slowly, deliberately, setting each bowl down in front of the guests. Everything was fine, until I reached Vanessa. As I lowered her bowl, it shifted slightly on the tray. Not a spill, not even close. Just a small, almost invisible adjustment as I placed it down. The kind of thing most people wouldn't even register. But Vanessa did. Her eyes snapped to the bowl, and then to me. For the first time that evening, she actually looked at me. Really looked. And then she spoke. Not quietly. Not privately. She spoke loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Could you be a little more careful?" she said sharply. "This isn't a diner." A pause. Then she added, "People like you need to pay more attention to what they're doing. People like you." The room changed immediately. Silence dropped over the table like a weight. Daniel's jaw tightened so hard I could see it from across the room. George Crane started to speak. "Vanessa." But she didn't let him finish. She simply waved a hand, dismissing it. "I'm just saying," she continued. "You come to a nice restaurant, you expect a certain level of service." Carol Crane quietly set her fork down. Catherine didn't move at all, but I could see her eyes. And I knew that look. It was the kind of silence that carries more judgment than words ever could. For a moment, I just stood there. Then I straightened slightly, looked directly at Vanessa, and said in a calm voice, "I apologize, ma'am. It won't happen again." No emotion, no reaction, just the words. And then I turned and walked back toward the service station. That I want to be honest with you about what that moment did to me. Because it's easy to tell this story like I felt nothing. But that wouldn't be true. I have been spoken to like that before. Not often, but enough. And it always carries the same edge. Back in my 20s, long before the money, before the companies, before any of the life I eventually built. I worked in a restaurant in Philadelphia while putting myself through business school. And I heard that same tone back then. That exact tone. The kind of voice people use when they've already decided who you are, without asking a single question. It doesn't matter what you say after that. In their mind, you're already placed somewhere beneath them. And standing there in that moment at Meridian, something came back to me that I hadn't thought about in decades. Not just the memory, but the feeling. That quiet, sharp sting of being dismissed by someone who believes you don't matter. I walked back to the service station and stood there for the next 20 minutes. Just watching the room. Watching my son at that table. Watching Vanessa. Watching the way she carried herself like the world naturally adjusted around her. And I kept thinking, not about her words, but about what Daniel was trying to do. Why he had asked me to be there. Why he needed to see something he couldn't be told. And then I thought about something else. About the man my son had become. A man willing to step back from certainty, just to make sure he wasn't building his future on the wrong foundation. And somewhere in that silence, behind the noise of the restaurant, I made a decision that at the end of the main course, something in the room shifted. Daniel stood up. He had been quiet since the appetizer incident. Not relaxed quiet, not comfortable quiet, but that controlled, focused silence people carry right before they make a decision they can't take back. He cleared his throat and said, "Before dessert, I want to introduce someone properly." Every head at the table turned toward him, including Vanessa's. But Daniel wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "Dad," he said, "would you come to the table?" For a moment, I didn't move. Then I took off the serving jacket, folded it once, and walked forward. Each step toward that table felt heavier than the last. Not because I was afraid of what would happen next, but because I already knew. I stopped beside Daniel, and I watched it happen. The realization didn't come all at once on Vanessa's face. It came in stages. First, confusion. A small pause. A subtle shift in her eyes as she tried to place me outside of the role she had assigned me. Then, recalculation. Her mind working faster now, reevaluating everything she had seen, everything she had assumed. Then, the color began to leave her face. Slowly, almost reluctantly. And finally, that unmistakable expression. The one I've only seen a handful of times in my life. The moment someone understands, fully and completely, the scale of what they have done. Daniel spoke again. "This is my father," he said. "Richard Holt." A pause. "He is the founder and chairman of Holt Enterprises and the owner of this restaurant." A heavier pause this time. "He has been serving this table tonight because I asked him to." Silence. "Because I needed to understand something before I made a decision that would affect the rest of my life." Then Daniel reached into his jacket. Slowly, carefully, and placed a small box on the table. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he looked at Vanessa. And when he spoke again, there was no anger in his voice. No raised tone. Nothing emotional at all. Just certainty. "Vanessa," he said, "I love you. I've loved you for 14 months. And tonight, I was going to ask you to spend the rest of your life with me." A pause. "But I cannot marry someone who speaks to another human being the way you spoke to him tonight." His eyes flicked briefly toward me. Not a waiter. Not anyone. He closed the box and put it back in his pocket. Then he said, "We need to talk. Not here. Later. But I needed everyone at this table to understand what happened tonight and why." And then he sat down. The room didn't move. Not a sound. Not a fork. Not a breath. George Crane stared at his plate. Carol Crane slowly lowered her gaze to her hands. No one spoke. And Vanessa looked at me. And for the first time that entire night, I didn't see control in her expression. I didn't see calculation. I didn't see the practiced confidence she carried into every room. I saw something else. Tears. Real tears. Not the kind people use to defend themselves. Not the kind used to shift blame or soften consequences. But the kind that come when a person finally sees themselves clearly for the first time in a very long time. And realizes they don't like what they see. That I'm not going to tell you this story has a clean ending. Because clean endings are for movies. Real life doesn't tie itself up that neatly. What I can tell you is this. Daniel and Vanessa didn't get engaged that night. But they didn't break up either. Instead, they did something far more difficult. They spent the next 3 months in a kind of relationship work that I can only describe as brutally honest. No pretending. No performance. Just two people trying to understand whether what they had was real enough to survive the truth. Vanessa called me twice during that time. The first call, she apologized. But not in the polished way people usually do when they want forgiveness. There was nothing rehearsed about it. It was hesitant, uneven. Sometimes she stopped mid-sentence, like she was struggling to find words she didn't normally have to use. But she said it anyway. And I remember listening, not interrupting. When she finished, I told her something simple. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her I didn't hold that night against her forever. And I told her something else too. That what mattered more than what she did in that moment was what she chose to do with the realization afterward. The second call surprised me. She didn't call to defend herself. She asked questions. About me. About my 20s. About what it was like working in restaurants before any of the money, before the companies, before the life I eventually built. She asked how I saw people back then, and whether that changed after success, or revealed something that was already there. We talked for nearly 40 minutes. And I'll be honest with you. It was one of the most honest conversations I've had in a long time. Then December came. Daniel proposed again. This time it wasn't in a restaurant. No audience. No setting designed for anyone else's approval. Just a quiet dinner. Just the two of them. No tests. No performances. No one watching. He called me afterward. I already knew what he was going to say before he said it. She said, "Yes, Dad." I replied, "I know." There was a pause. Then he asked, "How do you know?" And I told him the truth. "Because you called me right after." He laughed. A real laugh this time. Lighter. Relieved. Then his voice softened. "Dad, thank you. For that night. For putting on the jacket. For not reacting when I cut him off gently. "Daniel." He stopped. And I said the only thing that felt true in that moment. That's what fathers do. I want to say something directly to you watching this. I've spent time in boardrooms with people worth billions. And I've also sat in small diners at 2 in the morning with people who don't have money in the way the world usually measures it, but who still carry something far more valuable. And over the years, I've learned something I can't unlearn. A person's true character isn't revealed when life is difficult. It's revealed in something much quieter than that. It's what they do when they believe no one important is watching, when the person in front of them can't benefit them, when there is absolutely nothing to gain from kindness and everything to lose from carelessness. That is the real test. And the truth is, most people don't even realize they're taking it. But they are. And the ones who pass it, the ones who stay decent without an audience, without reward, without recognition, those are the people you can actually build a life with. Vanessa failed that test the first time, and she knew it. But she didn't stay the same person. She did the harder thing. She looked at herself honestly, and she changed. And that matters. Daniel, my son, he saw the signs early. And instead of ignoring them, instead of hoping they would fix themselves with time, he chose to find the truth before it became irreversible. Not out of cruelty, not out of pride, but out of love. That's the part people misunderstand. That is how I know I raised him right. Now I want to ask you something. If you were Daniel, if you had seen those same signs before that engagement dinner, would you have done what he did? Or would you have stayed quiet and hoped people change on their own? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, because this is one of those questions that doesn't have a simple answer. And if this story reminded you of someone in your life, someone who learned the hard way, or the right way, who a person really was, send it to them. Sometimes the right message only lands when the timing finally matches the truth. I'll see you on the next one.